Hello again. Welcome back to the series of lessons on the life of Jesus presented in the Gospel of John. Those who follow along in the series know that John presents his signs in such a way as to lead people to believe in Christ as the Son of God. We've noticed how he uses the words believe, hour, glory, along with the signs to prove that Christ is the Messiah, that he is the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy concerning Christ and what he's going to be doing, especially set forth in Isaiah. We also notice that in order to back up his support about Christ being the Son of God, John records several I am statements, lessons that are connected with the miracles. But these I am statements are not found in the other Gospels. Only John has these I am statements. So we're talking today about the healing of the blind man, how it affects the life of the people. So today we'll be noticing some of the questions we have. If you want to refer back to lesson number 13, we present the material there. And now here in lesson number 14, we will a series of questions and answer these questions. As you know, I like to do this as if I'm teaching a class. I love to teach, and I present the material that you'll be learning today in the sense of a series of lessons. If you feel like I'm calling on you, of course, it's just a make-believe class. But I think it's a good way for us to understand what is taking place. Hopefully you have a series of these lessons with you already. If not, you can download the lesson we have today. Or you can also contact me at shoalscreekbiblestudies@gmail.com. We'll send you a list of all 15 lessons in the series for $10. This $10 will cover the cost of binding and printing and shipping the material to you. And any money that's left over from this is going to go into our Woodlawn, Peru Mission Fund. Okay, beginning on the questions. Hope you have your questions in front of you. We'll start with question number 1. And I'll be asking different people in my class today. Remember, that's not really a class, but I'm making it like a class. I'll be asking them questions and talking about the questions as we go through. I hope you can follow along to the same thing yourself. Okay, question number 1. It says, who is the first person in the Gospel of John to identify Jesus with light? John chapter 1 and verse 5, you'll find that John the Baptizer points out that Jesus is the light that's come into the world. Question number 2 says, why does John identify Jesus as light? So because he can overcome death. Now the idea of light and death is unique to the Gospel of John in a sense. When John talks about Christ being the light, it's not just the light that gives us something to see by, but it's also the fact that in the light, Christ can overcome death. Okay? Question number 3. According to John chapter 3 and verse 19, why did many people reject Jesus as the light? I'll look it up real quick. John 3 verse 19. Okay, here, in front. Very good. What's the answer? Because men loved darkness more than light, and their deeds were evil. Okay? Very good answer. Okay, question number 4. When does Jesus first identify himself as the light of the world? Chapter 8, verse 12, we find this. Here he's talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. As he talks to her, he says, I am the light that is to come into the world. Okay, follow along again. Question number 5. Let's pay attention now. Some of you are not really listening like you ought to. Let's get all heads towards me now. Listen up here now as we go through this and make sure you have these answers correct, okay? All right, question number 5. It says, why does Jesus say that man should follow the light? Think about it. Why does Jesus say that man should follow the light? Okay, I see a hand back in the back. Yes, what's the answer? Correct. Jesus is the light. It is through him and through the light that men can overcome darkness and believe in Jesus, okay? Very good answer. Okay, question number 6. What event prompted Jesus to refer to himself as the light? Someone have the answer? Think about it. Yes, I see a hand on the side here. What's the answer now? Correct. The Jews were trying to entrap Jesus into believing or saying that he was breaking the law of man when it came to talking to the woman in adultery. And that's when he says no. Okay? Okay, question number 8. Or question number 9. What did Jesus tell the woman to do in chapter 8 and verse 11? And I think I referred to a minute ago as a Samaritan woman, but that's a different story. This is a woman that's caught in adultery, okay? What does Jesus tell her to do in John 8, verse 11? He says, go and sin no more. Notice here, Christ says, I am the light. Now you go and sin no more. The light can overcome the darkness. The darkness is sin, okay? All right. Question number 8. How does Jesus explain that he has the right to forgive sins? John 8, verses 11 through 14. You want to take your Bible and look back there in case you've forgotten? John chapter 8, verses 11 through 14. As soon as someone finds the answer, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you and we can move forward, okay? Okay, very good. Here's the answer. He has the power over physical and spiritual darkness. So Christ says, I am the light of the world. I have the power over not only physical darkness, but also spiritual darkness. So by that he can tell the woman who is caught in adultery to go and sin no more. Okay, question number 9. It says, we list 3 occasions when Jesus states that he has the power to forgive sin. One is in chapter 5, verse 14. So we'll look at it, please. One chapter 8 and verse 11. And chapter 9, verse 29. Okay, let's take them in order. Okay, who has John chapter 5, verse 14? What's taking place there? Okay, there he's talking to the lame man. And he tells the lame man that he has the power to heal him, and he can move forward and no longer sin. Okay? Chapter 8, verse 11. What's someone find there? Okay, I'm listening. Okay, right. He tells the woman to go and sin no more. And then finally, chapter 9, verse 29, that's what we're studying in our materials, particularly today, in lesson number 14. What's the answer? Okay, back on the third seat on right. Yes, okay, right. The answer is the case of the blind man, okay? The blind man, all right? So on 3 occasions, Christ tells the people that I am the light of the world, I can overcome sin, I can overcome darkness, I can give you spiritual light. Okay, number 10. It says, how does the healing of the blind man illustrate the power Jesus has over physical and spiritual darkness? Look in chapter 9, verses 2 through 5. Okay, we notice here the very first way John chapter 9 starts out. The disciples asked, who sinned? This man or his parents? He was born blind. And Christ says, no one. Neither man nor his parents. Okay? All right, number 11. It says, list 2 reasons why John may have chosen to include the healing of the blind man in his gospel. No one else concludes this. Neither Matthew, Mark, or Luke have this particular sign. Number 1. It could not be questioned. There was no way they could question this man was born blind. He's almost 40 years old. He's blind, been blind from birth. So there's no way that Christ could slip someone in and to pretend he was blind, now he can see. There's no way to deny the miracle. Then number 2, as soon as the triumph of light over darkness. So it shows a sign has the ability to triumph over darkness. Okay, question 12. How does the ability to restore sight to the blind man relate to the Old Testament? Well, back in Isaiah, okay, someone. Yes, pull back. What's the answer? Okay, good. According to the Old Testament, in Isaiah chapter 28, verse 19, and chapter 42, verse 16, also chapter 61, verse 11, if you want to look these passage up sometime, I don't have time today, but this was one of the signs of the coming of the Messiah. Now these Pharisees, who are here condemning Jesus, should have read the book of Isaiah by this time. And in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah says one of the signs of the Messiah, he will have the power to restore sight to the blind. So how this man now talking to Jesus and this is taking place, okay? Question number 13. How does the physical miracle of healing the blind man relate to the spiritual blessings that Jesus can provide? Someone have the answer? Okay, over here on the third row, fifth seat. What's the answer? Right. Jesus has the power over physical and spiritual darkness. Now, I know you can't hear the people in my class. The sound is not all that good in here. No sound at all, really. It's just by my makeup class. But notice how these things are taking place, okay? All right, question number 14. From the way John discusses the healing, what seems to be the main reason that he chose this sign? Okay, someone think about it. Okay, up here on the front seat, front row. You've been paying attention, been watching, you're doing a great job. What's the answer? Okay, it's a sign to show the triumph of light over darkness, in which the physical miracle of healing the blind man is turned into a spiritual lesson to show how that sin can lead to darkness, and how that Christ can take this sin and take it away and bring about spiritual light. That's the reason John, I think, includes this miracle, okay? All right, question number 15. Hope you got your question. I'll follow along with them. If I'm going too fast, I'll try to slow down so you can write your answers in. Okay, question number 15. List four ways in which the interrogation of the former blind man serves to strengthen his faith in Jesus. Look in verse 11, verse 17, verse 33, and verse 38. And there you're going to find how this interrogation is going to change, okay? Now, in the beginning, they simply asked the man what has taken place, and Jesus was the one who healed him. He has to admit that. He says, when he's been interrogated, the blind man says, this man named Jesus healed me. All right, as the interrogation continued, we notice he called the idea of Christ being healed, he's now going to believe in Jesus as a prophet. He says he's a prophet. Then number 3, he becomes a defender of Jesus over the Pharisees. Then number 4, when Christ talks to him, he says, I believe in you as the Son of God. So this man is led from some depth of understanding, and through the interrogation, finally, the man comes out and says, this man is the Son of God, and I believe in him. Okay? So essentially how this interrogation is going to lead, okay? Number 18. In the second interrogation of the blind man, how do the Pharisees seek to discredit the testimony of the blind man? Now they're trying to entrap him, trying to get him in trouble, okay? So in the interrogation, the second one, they seek to show through his parents that he was not blind. And they call his parents and say, hey, is this your son? Was he blind? And all the parents are going to say is, yes, he is our son, but we do not know how he can now see. He was blind. Now, they're not willing to say that Jesus was the one who gave him sight. And there's several reasons for that, which we'll go into later on, maybe. Okay? Number 20. By the end of the blind man's testimony, what is the attitude of the Pharisees as to what he says about Jesus? Verse 27. Somebody look there real quick. Okay, in the very, very back there, barely see you back there. What's the answer? They're not going to believe in Jesus no matter what he says, no matter what took place. They decided, we don't care. The man may have been healed. We don't care. He may be in his sight. We don't care. We're not going to believe in Jesus as the Son of God whatsoever. So they're really turning away from Jesus, okay? All right, question number 23. It says, how did the Jews taunt the blind man? You're like in a trial today. If the person in charge cannot get someone to change their testimony, sometimes they begin to ridicule them or taunt them to make them feel bad so that they might change their testimony. And that's what they do here, you know. They begin to tell the man that there's no way this can happen, and they taunt him to try to get him to change his mind about God being the one that could teach them. And they even says, you know, You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? There's your tongue, okay? Number 22. When the Jews cast the man out of the synagogue and out of their sight, what have they done in reality? Now, they cast the man out. Now, when they cast him out of the synagogue, it means he's cut off not only from the way to worship God in the synagogue, but he's also cut off from all of his Jewish friends. Everything in their society was built around coming to the synagogue, this act of worship there. That's where they met for their worship services. It's where also they had their friends that went with them throughout their life. Everything involved in their lives centered around the synagogue. So to be cut off was to be a very harsh thing. That's what they did with this man, okay? When they can't defeat him, when they can't even change his mind, they cut him out of the synagogue, okay? Okay, question number 23. It says, how does Jesus pronounce judgment on the Pharisees? Look in verse 39 and 41. Now, we talked about this in the last session, so in case you've forgotten, look back in your Bible to verse 39 and verse 41 in John chapter 9. We find that it says, Christ came into the world so that those who could not see those who see may become blind. Now, wait a minute. Why would Christ come into the world to make those who see become blind? It's a spiritual thing. You know, the Pharisees could see with their eyes. They had sight. But spiritually, they were very blind. They're not willing to see what the miracle taking place. They're not willing to recognize Christ as the Son of God, as the Messiah. And so, in a spiritual sense, they're now very blind, okay? All right, number 24. What does the reaction of some of the Pharisees to Christ's statement about their being blind show about their lives? Verse 41. Someone look for 41, okay? Who has it? Okay. Fifth row back. Second seat. See your hand up, okay? What's the answer? Okay. They are rejecting all the things about their being saved. Their guilt will remain. And Christ says, here, if you're not willing to believe in me, your sin is going to remain, and you cannot have salvation, okay? All right, number 25. Move along with the questions. A few more here, and we're ready to go into one of the other signs, okay? Number 25. It says, how does Jesus explain the situation in which these people are in return to God, in relation to God? Look in verse 15, verse 22. It says, in rejecting Jesus, they have rejected God as well. When they rejected Jesus, they also rejected God, okay? Then number 26 says, how is John's relating of the discourse in John chapter 9 similar to the style of the prophets in the Old Testament? Now, Christ uses some ideas here, some techniques here. They're similar to what happened in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the prophets, many times, after going along and trying to get someone to do something, they're going to tie in a lesson that is symbolic to get people to try to understand what has taken place. So here, Christ takes the idea of healing the blind man and turns it into a symbol of the rejection of the Jews into utter darkness because of their sin. Okay, that's the end of our questions. Now, the last miracle, which has a I am statement attached to it, is the raising of Lazarus and the resurrection in life discourse. We talked about Christ being the one who is the light of the world. He is the bread of life. He is the one who is working as God is working. And now we find John talks about Jesus and the resurrection and life discourse. And unlike some of the previous signs, John does not attach a long discourse of Jesus to the resurrection of Lazarus in order to explain its significance. But instead, he explains it through the discussions Jesus has with Martha and Mary. Now, the importance of the sign is made known at the very beginning of the narrative. When Christ receives word that Lazarus is sick, in verse 4, he states, this sickness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now the disciples did not understand that at all. And Jesus knows this. Now Christ knows that the death of Lazarus will have the last word because he has the power to overturn death. And as a result of this miracle, he'll be glorified in two ways. First, in the ordinary sense, that many Jews will be led to believe in him, but also in the sense that as Lazarus is raised from the dead, this action will be a prelude to the cross as Christ's enemies make their final assault on Jesus. So the comments about the resurrection of life here in chapter 11 is very, very important. I'm going to notice how it's taking place here. And in order for this to be a true sign of the resurrection, it must be, in some way, find a place for the dying of Jesus, to which he is revealed as the resurrection and the life. It's at this point that the importance of the conversation between Jesus and his disciples before they depart to Galilee become clear. Their conversation refers back to the attempts to those to stone him earlier. And they say, well, why do we want to go back and be stoned? Now these attempts were followed by retreats from the place where Christ manifests his glory. The place manifesting his glory will now become the place of the hostility which will lead to his death. Now according to God's timetable, not man's, this summons to come back to Judea demonstrates that Christ is going to die on his schedule, on the schedule of God, and not that of the schedule of other people. It's a time for the glory of God to be manifested as Jesus faces death. Christ's statement about walking in the day, verses 9 to 10, also expressed the sense of the climax of his ministry. Christ's answer to the disciples' question, Rabbi, the Jews are just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Shows that there is no danger yet, for his day is not over. He still has the some time left before the hour. It also suggests that the danger need not be feared by those who walk in the light, or those who follow on his appointed day. Christ says it's going to be okay. I've got to go, but don't be afraid. So we can see that John intended for this part of the discourse to be understood in this way, by his use of Thomas' declaration of loyalty. Now Thomas says, okay, in verse 14, let us also go that we may die with him. Lack of faith on the part of the apostles. Just say they should have known after following Christ for over 3 years in his ministry, they should have known that they didn't have to worry, that Christ overcome death. But Thomas expresses the inability for the disciples to really believe in Christ and what has taken place. He said, let us also go that we may die with him. So now as John writes the gospel years later, he realized that Thomas' statement had greater meaning than Thomas realized. What Thomas expressed, John now knows to be a fact. Christ had died and returned to Judea, and the disciples had to share in his fate. Now the theme of this chapter, I am the resurrection and life, is explained in the discourse between Jesus and Martha and Mary. It is evident that from Martha's statement, when Christ arrived in Bethany, that she did not really understand the full extent of what's taking place. She didn't understand the full extent of Christ's power. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus tells her Lazarus will rise again, Martha, who was familiar with the Jewish idea of resurrection, replies that she knows he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Verse 24. Now Jesus, though, had mentioned the relationship of the resurrection in some of his previous discourses, like in John chapter 5, verses 14 through 29. in chapter 6, verse 54. But this will be the first time he makes his claim so explicit. He now states, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, shall be alive. And everyone who lives in me, believes in me, shall never die. Verses 25 to 26. Okay, our time is up in this session. Hope everybody's been having a good time in it. 25 minutes, what we're trying to keep on all the sessions. As I told you earlier, one of my teachers in the past, Brother Tom Holland, said, the mind cannot absorb more than the seat can endure. So I hope you'll stay tuned and come back later for lesson number 15, the last in the series.